Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. We're continuing our Big 12 football predictions today, and our next team has won 11 or more games 3 of the past 4 years, and with a solid defense and a great head coach, could continue that trend in 2018. They are the TCU Horned Frogs. TCU has come so close to making the college football playoff under Gary Patterson, but just can't ever seem to get over the hump. In 2014, the Horned Frogs went 12-1 in a year that a lot of people thought they got snubbed by the College Football Playoff Committee, their lone loss coming to a very solid Baylor squad, and they took out their frustrations by beating Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl and finishing the year at number 3 in the country. The next year, they started off the season number 2 and won 11 games, but missed out on the College Football Playoff. And last year, saw themselves rise as high as number 4 in the country before losing to Iowa State on the road. They lost the Big 12 championship game, but finished the year with an 11-3 record, including a remarkable comeback in their bowl game against Stanford. And Gary Patterson has done a great job with this Horned Frogs team. I think eventually their time will come where he will get them to the College Football Playoff. He's by far one of the better coaches in the nation and in the Big 12, and he certainly has a team this year that can once again compete for a Big 12 championship game. They have some key starters that they have to replace, namely their quarterback in Kenny Hill. They've got to replace him with Sean Robinson, a sophomore quarterback who had a little bit of playing experience last year, but that's going to be the key for TCU this season, is how quickly will Robinson adjust to the offense. He's getting kind of thrust onto the scene. Luckily, they open up against Southern, so he'll be able to get some playing time under his belt before they get into some bigger games. But that's going to be the key for TCU, is how well Robinson plays at the quarterback position. They do have a solid running back in Darius Anderson and some solid wide receivers in Kevontae Turpin and Jalen Rager, their leading wide receiver from last year. So he's going to have plenty of targets to throw to, and if he has trouble, just hand it off to Darius Anderson. They'll be just fine. But the kicker is they only return 2 offensive linemen, so a very inexperienced TCU offensive line, which is bad news for Anderson and Robinson both. On defense, they returned 6 starters, and that could be one of the better defenses in the Big 12 this season. They have Ross Blacklock leading the defensive line, so a big player there. You got Ty Summers leading the linebacking core, and then Jeff Gladney and Nico Small leading the secondary position. TCU, they have 6 returning starters on defense. They have 2 returning starters in each position group, along the defensive line and the linebacker group, and in the secondary. So a very experienced and deep TCU defense this season that could potentially get them back to the Big 12 championship game. They open up the season against Southern. That's obviously going to be a win for the Horned Frogs. They're not worried about that. And I'm not worried about the road game against SMU either. Chad Morris has left to take the head coaching job at Arkansas, and so Sonny Dykes comes in, who has had previous solid head coaching experience, namely last stint at California. He's coming in with a new scheme. I just don't see SMU giving TCU much of a fight in his first year. And then a huge game against Ohio State and Arlington. This will be the game that, if they can pull this off against the Buckeyes, will show them they're not only just Big 12 title contenders, but certainly college football playoff contenders, and that TCU is much better than I think a lot of people are giving them credit for. But this is an Ohio State team, though, that's going to be extremely difficult to face this year. You've got Dwayne Haskins at the quarterback position, so a dual-threat quarterback there. J.K. Dobbins at the running back position. Austin Mack, one of their top wide receivers, and a very experienced offensive line. So the offense, very solid for the Buckeyes. I'm also very intrigued to see Urban Meyer go up against Gary Patterson, 2 great coaching minds there. So the offense is great, and maybe the TCU defense can shut them down, but here's the kicker. Ohio State has Nick Bosa along that defensive line, and he's going up against a TCU offensive line that only returns 2 offensive linemen and has a lot of inexperience. That's bad news for the Horned Frogs, and Ohio State has a very, very strong secondary, so they might have to force TCU to win this game on the ground. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that, and if they have to force them to win this game through the air, will Sean Robinson be far long enough to lead the Horned Frogs to a victory in Arlington? I just don't see that happening. I think Ohio State is just too deep and too talented on both sides of the ball to lose this game to TCU. But it could be a very close game, and like I said, I'm very excited to see the coaching matchup between Urban Meyer and Gary Patterson. I think they're going to lose a second straight game here, though, to Texas. And a Texas team that, like I've said before, every year gets a bunch of hate. Overrated, they're overhyped, they're going to disappoint, they're going to choke. But I'm telling you, this is a different Texas team. At least that's what I believe. I believe this is a Texas team that's a lot different this year. Tom Herman comes in. The culture is different there. The mindset is different in Texas this year, and they have a lot of talent. Last year, TCU took care of Texas last year. Texas was still trying to figure some stuff out last year. Had some injuries going their way that didn't help them at all. But this year, it's at Texas, and a team that I really think is going to have a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. namely on the defensive side of the ball. This could be a defensive battle. You put a very good Texas offense against a very good TCU defense, and a very solid Texas defense against a TCU offense that we're still a little unsure of going into week 4 of the season. I think Texas gets a big win in revenge over TCU this season, especially with it being at home. I do think TCU gets a little bit of revenge of their own, though, facing Iowa State at home. You remember last year TCU was number 4 in the nation when they went on the road to Iowa State, and they just could not capitalize in the red zone. Too many turnovers or stops in the red zone. Iowa State absolutely deserved to win that game. A great performance by them, beating the Horned Frogs 14-7. But this year, though, it's a different team for both TCU and Iowa State. It's back at TCU. Iowa State, of course, not afraid to play anybody on the road, beating Oklahoma last year at their house. I mean, if you can do that, I think you can win anywhere in the Big 12. This is a TCU team that I think by this point, their defense is going to be too strong for a very solid Iowa State offense. And hopefully Sean Robinson by this point will start gelling a little bit, getting used to this offense, making some big plays, getting more comfortable. And I do think they get a win over the Cyclones going into the bye week. So they're 3-2, and things are still looking okay for them. They get a bye week going into Texas Tech, and I think that's also a win for TCU, a Texas Tech team. Cliff Kingsbury's on the hot seat, and I've said that before. Cliff Kingsbury, this is the year, make or break you. You've got to get to a bowl game, maybe win 7 games if he wants to keep his job. Their defense, very strong as well with 10 returning starters, and once again, you could see a very strong defensive battle like you might see against Texas when TCU and Texas square off. A strong TCU defense, a strong Texas Tech defense. Texas Tech has a very, very strong offense as well, as they always do under Cliff Kingsbury. But I think home field advantage and the week of rest beforehand is going to benefit TCU. Gary Patterson not going to be, I don't think, pleased with a 3-2 start going into the bye week. He's going to whip this team into shape, and they get a win over Texas Tech. But the winning streak doesn't last long because I think they lose on the road at home to Oklahoma. So even though it is at TCU, this is an Oklahoma team that is still probably the best in the Big 12. Yes, they lose Baker Mayfield. Yes, they lose some big-time playmakers on the defensive side of the ball as well. But they're going to be able to replace that well. Lincoln Riley did a great job last year with his first time being a head coach. They have Kyler Murray at quarterback or Austin Kendall, whichever one it is. I think it's going to be Murray. I think a lot of people believe it's going to be Murray. So a very solid dual-threat quarterback there. Even though it is at home, TCU wanting to get revenge for the beatdowns they took from the Sooners last year, an 18-point loss the first time they met, and then a 24-point loss in the Big 12 championship game. I think this Oklahoma team is just too talented on both sides of the ball. I think they're going to be able to get the win on the road against TCU, who I do think does have some questions that they need to fill. Maybe they will have them filled by October 20th, about halfway through the year, but I'm still going to give the edge to the Sooners for right now. On the road against Kansas, not much of an issue there. That's going to be a great bounce-back game. After that Oklahoma loss. Kansas, certainly a team that TCU can't overlook. I believe it was 2 years ago that Kansas almost defeated TCU on their home turf at Kansas. In a Kansas team that returns 19 starters and maybe will be a little more competitive this year, but I still think TCU will get the win there. And I think they're going to get the win over Kansas State as well. A Kansas State team that I'm high on, one that I think could be a dark horse in the Big 12. You got Alex Delton. You got Alex Delton at quarterback position, Alex Barnes at the running back position. Bill Snyder, by far one of the better head coaches in the Big 12, always doing a great job with this team. But I think with it being at TCU and with Kansas State having a little bit of an experience on the defensive side of the ball, not as strong of defense as TCU is going to have, I think they get a win over the Wildcats. And so they've won 3 of their last 4 games, and I think that streak comes to an end against West Virginia. And as I've said before, this is a West Virginia team that I am very, very high on, the one that I really, really like this season. I love Will Grier at quarterback. I think arguably he is maybe the best quarterback in the nation. Totally the best quarterback in the Big 12, I think, but maybe even in the nation. Probably one of the better wide receiving corps in the nation, too. David Sills and Gary Jennings there. And the defense is what's hurt West Virginia in the past. They've got a heck of an offense if they can stay healthy. They returned 5 starters on the defensive side of the ball. Dana Holgorsen, as I've said before, has slowly built up this defense. He's bringing in some junior college transfers. The last couple of years, they've only had 3 returning starters. You add 2 more to that. This is a very, very dangerous West Virginia team. It's on the road for TCU here. And even though they have a strong defense, I think West Virginia is going to be able to exploit some of those weaknesses and have a pretty big day against this TCU team. And the defense going to be able to, and West Virginia's defense is going to be able to shut down this TCU offense. I think all the signs, in my opinion, pointing towards a West Virginia victory. Then on the road against Baylor, a Baylor team that I think really will improve this season after going 1-11 last year. Matt Rule really, I think, is going to turn this Bears team around, but not enough to beat TCU, even though it is at home for Baylor. I love Charlie Brewer at the quarterback position. I think he's going to make some big strides in his second year as starter. And I think Baylor will too second year under Matt Rule. I think they will take some major strides forward and be much more improved, much more competitive, especially with 17 returning starters, but just not enough to beat the Horned Frogs. I think that's another win for TCU there. And they close out the year at home against Oklahoma State, who also loses some big-time playmakers, namely at the quarterback position, losing Mason Rudolph, and also at the wide receiver position, losing James Washington. It's at home for TCU. They're looking to cap off another solid year against a Cowboys team that once again will be strong on the defensive side of the ball. A lot of these teams in the Big 12, oddly enough, will have some fairly strong defenses and losing some big-time playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. But I think TCU will get the win over Oklahoma State in what could be a fairly low-scoring game. I think by this point, both teams would have figured out the issues they might have at the quarterback position or any issues that they might have on offense. But I think TCU does get the win at home in the season finale, and that's going to give them an 8-4 record on the year. And obviously not a record that is super thrilling or super exciting, but still respectable for TCU. It's almost like a rebuilding year, but I tell you what, if my team had an 8-4 rebuilding year, I would be very happy with that. This is a TCU team that lost a lot of playmakers, and like anytime you have to replace your star quarterback, it's very tough there. And a very brutal schedule for TCU this year. Ohio State non-conference play, Texas on the road, a tough team as always. Oklahoma probably the favorite in the Big 12, on the road against West Virginia, on the road against a Baylor team that should improve. It's a tough schedule for TCU, but I know that Gary Patterson's going to get the most out of his team. I think 8-4 is a very respectable record for the Horned Frogs this year, and maybe next year with a little more experience across the board for the Horned Frogs, they can take an even bigger step and try to clinch a Big 12 championship and maybe finally break through into the college football playoff. So as always, thank you for watching. Please go check us out on Twitter at Gridiron Expert, on Instagram at The Gridiron Expert, and always here on YouTube. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time on The Gridiron Expert.